Hello and welcome to my easy to understand guide to humans and the returned, and in this video we're going to be looking specifically at industry. Now, industry is quite a complex topic and it's one of the ones that students tend to find one of the hardest ones to study. So I'm going to try and show you on the screen right now all of the things that you really should be able to understand, talk about, write about in the exam for either humans or the returned. And in this video I'm going to try and go through a whole range of these aspects to help you be a bit more confident with them. You're going to need to know quite a lot of factual information for the TV topic in component 2. The good thing is that both humans and the returned were shown on Channel 4 in the UK, and so that does help us because it narrows down the number of companies you're going to have to know about. But I will just give you a little bit of background information about the two programmes, and this is the kind of thing it might be useful to maybe make your own fact sheets for, revision posters, flashcards, because there's quite a lot of factual information you need to know. Channel 4 is the broadcaster in the UK that commissioned the series Humans in the UK. They are the ones that wanted to show it on their channel, but Channel 4 doesn't actually have its own in-house production studios. So it is simply a broadcaster, and they do not have the ability to produce content in-house. So what they do is they outsource the production work. They hire production companies to make the programmes that they want made. And they outsourced the production of Humans to a company called Kudos. They did this in collaboration with AMC. So Kudos and AMC worked together. AMC is an American TV channel, and they worked together to produce Humans. And this kind of collaboration, and in particular because this is an international collaboration, an international co-production, it can be really useful because it means that you've got two companies from different parts of the world working together to produce something. Often that means that you have a higher budget, but it also means you have more resources, more facilities, more staff, and you've got a company in another country, AMC, who will help you to distribute that programme and market it globally. So having connections in other countries right at the very start in terms of production is a really great way of ensuring the success of your programme. Perhaps having the American company AMC involved was a good way for Humans and the rest of the production team to attract some American talent to the show. So, for example, in the first series of Humans, William Hurt plays the character George. He's quite a big American star. He'd be quite recognisable to adult British and American audiences, and indeed other global audiences too, because he has been in lots of recognisable things. But it may also have attracted Carrie-Anne Moss to season 2. She also is quite a famous American star who's in the Matrix franchise. And so maybe having international production companies working in collaboration with Kudos and Channel 4 meant they were able to attract more American talent as well. Channel 4 is, in essence, a commercial company. They're funded by commercials, i.e. adverts in ad breaks. And so they do have a need to attract advertisers. And the only way you can attract advertisers is by ensuring that you have a large audience. So they will often make programming that, as well as being alternative and niche for their public service broadcasting remit, is also going to have a reasonably wide appeal, and is potentially going to be something that they can get many audiences to watch and therefore then make money from the advertising for. So Channel 4 have to tread this quite fine line between being alternative, being niche, but also feeling the need to attract advertisers to their channel. What you need to remember is that Channel 4 is a not-for-profit company, which makes it slightly different to other commercial companies. What that means is they're not making and saving huge amounts of profit. They're not putting all their money into a bank account and keeping it. Any profit that they make from programmes gets ploughed back into making more programming. It's called the Robin Hood method, so kind of rob from the rich and give to the poor, if that makes sense. And so the idea is that if they make a big programme like Humans, that they know is going to have wide appeal, mainstream appeal, and is going to be popular, they know they're going to be able to make quite a lot of money from that programme in terms of advertising space and slots, merchandise, distribution globally, etc. but they will then use that money that they make and plough that into some of their other programs that they have to make as part of their public service remit, so things like the news, and they will use their money from humans to plough it into those programs that are not necessarily going to make the same amount of profit. It's important to remember that, they do need to make these big budget programs sometimes, like Humans, in order to keep funding going for some of their other programs that they know they're probably going to make a loss on otherwise. Now, as Kudos was one of the production companies working on making Humans, it's important to know a bit of background information about them. Kudos is a subsidiary company of a larger conglomerate. The people or the company that owns Kudos is Endemol Shine, and Endemol Shine itself is a subsidiary owned by a massive conglomerate which includes Disney. So you're talking about one of the biggest companies in the entire world. And having your company as part of this kind of vertically, horizontally integrated conglomerate that operates on a global scale, making trillions of dollars a year, has a huge benefit for you as a company and a production. It means that you're going to have increased budget. It means that you're going to have more resources. It means that you are recognised and you have that reputation, and perhaps it might then be easier to make a deal with Channel 4 about producing Humans, because Channel 4 are going to trust you and respect you as a company if they know that you're involved with Disney. Perhaps it's going to mean that Disney are going to be able to help you, and certainly Endemol Shine, with their hundreds of offices around the world, are going to be able to help you to distribute and market that product on a global scale. So having Kudos involved, and Kudos being part of these bigger groups, is really important. If you look at The Returned was produced and made in France, and it was produced by Canal+, which is a large channel, very well known in France. And Canal+ is a subsidiary of a bigger conglomerate, Vivendi. Now, Vivendi is horizontally, vertically integrated, and they are diversified into other areas. So as well as making TV, and a lot of TV, they also are involved in advertising, film production, video game production. So again, they are also made by quite a large company, and that would have had a really positive effect in terms of maybe giving them the opportunity to distribute that programme globally, which is probably why they were able to do a deal with Channel 4 and distribute it to the UK as well as to other countries. Now, in terms of budget, the two shows had quite contrasting budgets. Humans had a budget of about £12 million for the first series, and that is really quite a large budget for a TV programme. And so this would have enabled them to have cast members that perhaps were a little bit more well-known, like William Hurt. It might have enabled them to have those slightly bigger set pieces and the use of some of the kind of action sequences that we see later on in the series, as well as spending that money on a huge marketing campaign, don't forget, which we'll talk about later. The Returned had a much smaller budget because it was a more niche programme, and because they knew it was going to have a limited appeal to audiences and that they might not be able to distribute it to as wide an area as Humans. It meant that funding was perhaps slightly more limited, and actually Canal+ couldn't get all of their funding that they needed from their parent company Vivendi, possibly because Vivendi saw it as too much of a risk to fund it entirely. So they actually had to apply for funds from two French charities, and these two French charities were there specifically to fund arts projects, film projects that showed France and French culture, and in particular regional France. So the funding and where it comes from actually had an impact on the kind of content in The Returned. It is why it is set in the middle of nowhere in a rural location, and that perhaps makes it even more niche by default, because we're not seeing one of the more popular, well-known cities. And so actually the funding can have an impact on the content of a show. When Humans was eventually distributed to the US, it was shown on a channel called Sundance TV, which handily is owned part of the conglomerate AMC. So all of these companies that you're studying for TV are kind of interrelated in some way. Now, Sundance TV as a channel is quite a specialist channel that AMC owns. And the reason for that is it focuses on independent TV, independent films, and shows things that are more alternative and niche. So the company AMC is clearly kind of directing the programming to ensure that big budget mainstream programmes like Humans are shown on AMC, which is its mainstream channel, and that the more alternative niche programming, like The Returned, is shown on a channel like Sundance. Global distribution is a big part of the TV industry, and you could very well get a question about this in the exam. So operating across the world is something that is seen quite a lot within the companies and the TV programmes that you're studying. I've already mentioned that Humans was shown in America on AMC. It was actually adapted from a programme called Real Humans, which was a Swedish TV show originally. And it was quite popular in Sweden and other kind of North European countries. And so what they felt was that if it was popular there, they could adapt it, remake it, and have it distributed within the UK and America. And actually, since then, it's been adapted several other times. There is a Chinese version of Humans, there is a Thai version of Humans. And so the programme has been adapted and rebranded and remade for different audiences. And perhaps that shows how important global distribution is for a company. The fact that it had to be remade at all for different audiences is something you might want to consider, why they couldn't have just taken the Swedish version of Humans and shown that in the UK. Begs the question, do audiences actually like foreign language programming, which is something that you want to consider about The Returned. Perhaps that is what makes The Returned so niche. For many audiences, the subtitles and the fact that it's in French puts a lot of audiences off. So perhaps they just made the decision to remake Real Humans using a UK cast, and then remake it again in America using a US cast, and again in China using a Chinese cast, because some audiences just cannot appreciate or engage with foreign programming. And so perhaps having to make something that is specific to that domestic audience, that national audience, is something that is quite important for a lot of programmes. The Returned itself is based on a French film called Les Revenants, which means sort of they're coming back, they're returning. The idea is that it was in French, it did quite well in France, this film, and they decided to adapt it into a TV series, as is quite common with popular films. That was then distributed to the UK, but distributing a foreign language film with French subtitles or French dubbed language is quite tricky. A lot of audiences don't like dubbing or subtitles, it puts them off. And so they actually adapted this for an American audience with an American cast. And so again, it kind of shows that rebranding and remaking programs is very common, but in order to do that to a global audience, sometimes you actually have to remake the program in its entirety because of audience demands and audience expectations. Of course, global distribution has been made much easier by the invention of new technologies. So the fact that we have streaming sites now, Channel 4 has All 4 and its website, makes it much easier for audiences around the world, regardless of time zone, regardless of nationality, to be able to access programmes whenever they want, wherever they want, from all sorts of other countries. Perhaps that's how they managed to drum up engagement and interest amongst audiences globally. And perhaps that's how they managed to justify then the cost of adapting the shows for other countries as well. The use of social media has been really important and key in global distribution as well. Both programmes used Facebook and Twitter to distribute their market materials globally. They both had official Facebook pages where you could follow the programme and get information about the cast and the crew and the storylines. They used Twitter an awful lot to kind of tweet out updates about what was happening with the various series that had been recorded. And so these global networks, these global platforms of social media has been key in helping the programmes to reach wider, more global audiences. It's really important that you understand the marketing that was done for each of the programmes, Humans and The Returned, and being able to pick out specific examples and explain why they were done or how they would have engaged the target audience is important as well. So with Humans, they did a massive marketing campaign. Channel 4 ploughed a huge amount of money, as well as AMC, into the marketing of the programme, both nationally in Britain and also internationally via social media and websites as well. They had a variety of trailers that were broadcast on TV and also available on YouTube. And these were used to hopefully engage the target audience, show them the age of the characters and the type of cast that were in the show. And they also used the trailers to really connote the genre of the programme, to make the sci-fi aspects really clear as well, and to kind of add enigma. And this is the same with the posters as well. The posters were very enigmatic and mysterious, and they were used to hook in an audience and to try and signify that sci-fi genre as well. They used a whole range of other weird and wonderful techniques as well. On Regent Street in London, they opened up a digital display for humans where passers-by could go past and actually interact with a kind of holographic synth. And the idea was to be as kind of interesting and unusual as possible. And lots of people stopped, lots of people filmed it on their phones, which of course then went onto social media and went viral. It was a great way of, gaining interest in quite a public place. Regent Street is really quite a well-known place within London. It's a very good way of targeting British audiences, but it's also a really good way of targeting international audiences, because you get a lot of tourists from other countries in places like Regent Street, and they're likely to then find out about the programme that way as well. In addition to that, around the streets of London and other big cities in the UK, there were lorries driving around as though they were from Persona Synthetics, the company, the fictional company from the programme, and they were there supposedly to pick up faulty synths, again, kind of adding this layer of enigma. It's a very hyper-real marketing campaign. The marketing materials act as simulacra, and if you're not sure what that means, please watch the video that I've done on Baudrillard and postmodernism. But a lot of the marketing materials were designed to look as though they were very real, and this would have been a great way of engaging the audience. For example, there was also an eBay page where people were supposedly selling faulty synths. There was the Persona Synthetics website, which was set up as though it was a real company selling real synths. And there was a big warning sign on it saying that they were collecting and doing an emergency recall of synths that were malfunctioning, all designed to drum up interest into the show. Cast and crew of humans appeared at multiple events, so on chat shows, TV programmes, current affairs shows. They also did interviews with magazines as well, so Gemma Chan, the actress that plays Anita, and several of the other cast appeared on lots of TV guides doing interviews. And they also made appearances at Comic-Con and other TV-related events where they could engage with fans, talk about the series, and try and drum up publicity that way too. Many of their trailers and their website as well also featured reference to the fact that they won Emmys and BAFTAs for their first series, and this was a great way of promoting the show as being quality, as being mainstream, and to try and engage audiences who wanted to see something that was respected but also very popular. The Returns marketing campaign, by contrast, was much smaller, and this is probably due to the fact that it was a more niche programme. It had a more limited budget, despite being made by a company that was part of a conglomerate. So this kind of quite independent niche programme used quite independent niche marketing methods. They did use a lot of online methods, so they did have a website. They did use technology, so audiences could go onto the Returned website and take part in a 360-degree virtual tour of the village, and that was quite a good way of engaging those slightly younger, tech-savvy audiences. And they also used social media as well. People could follow the show on social media too, and the cast and crew. They advertised both on their trailer and on some of their posters that they had won something called a Peabody Award. Now, a Peabody Award is quite a culturally significant award that is given to programmes that are independent and alternative, and so perhaps being awarded this and featuring that award on some of their marketing materials was a good way of signifying to audiences that this programme was culturally significant and was something that if they wanted to be educated and to feel as though they were getting quite kind of high-class entertainment-based programmes, that this is something that they should watch. Returned also had multiple posters made for it. each poster featured a different character or group of characters from the show, and potentially this is because they wanted to try and widen their target audience. If they had just used Victor on one poster, perhaps people might have assumed this was a children's drama. If they had just used Adele and Simone, people might have assumed that this was a romance. And actually, by having the multiple posters, it created these multiple narratives for audiences, and they knew there was going to be lots of characters, lots of different storylines, and that in theory there was a poster for every type of audience, whether they were female or male, young or slightly older. So the poster campaign was quite significant in that respect. There was a soundtrack by a group called Mogwai, which was used quite heavily in The Returned, which was also released alongside the TV series. And the soundtrack was really quite haunting. It added to the genre of the programme. And the band had quite a cult following as well. And that helped them to promote their products to Mogwai's audience too. There was a trailer made for The Returned that was shown in the UK. Quite cleverly, the trailer did not feature any dialogue. It was just images and music and kind of shocking scenes or scenes of action. There was no speaking at all. And potentially this is because they didn't want people to realise that it was in French with subtitles, because they felt that would have put off some audiences. So they were quite sneaky by concealing the fact that it was a French foreign language programme in the trailer, in an attempt to get audiences engaged to at least the first episode to try and hook them in. However, Channel 4 didn't completely ignore the French nature of the programme. They actually used it in some marketing materials as a kind of unique selling point. So it was almost as if they were holding like a French celebration. When The Returned aired, they had a French voiceover artist do the introduction before the programme started. And then they had French adverts shown in the ad breaks. And maybe to create the idea that this programme, you know, had cultural significance, it made it feel a bit more exotic to the audience, as though they were getting a kind of insight into French culture by watching it. The TV show The Returned was eventually turned into a book as well. Perhaps this idea of this merchandise and a synergetic product might have been used to engage those cultural, more educated audiences who might be watching a niche programme and who also might enjoy reading. And there was a range of other merchandise available as well, things like T-shirts, and that might appeal to those audiences who quite like cult programming. In the marketing materials for Humans, there was a really diverse range of people used, men, women, black, white, Asian, and actually a lot of these kind of cultures and ethnicities are often underrepresented in media products. And so Channel 4 using them within their posters and trailers perhaps might have seemed unique or interesting to audiences, particularly those audiences wanting more diversity. And it may also be linked to Channel 4's remit as a company as well, which we're going to come on to now. So Channel 4 is a public service broadcaster. What that means is that it has a remit. A remit is a kind of required contract, if you like, where they have to do certain things. So have a look at things like Humans, the fact that there is such a diverse cast in terms of ethnicity, the fact that The Returned as a programme is on a tool, a French language programme, really quite niche and alternative in style, in filmmaking, in genre. So these elements might reflect the channel and their public service broadcasting remit. Channel 4 actually buying the rights to The Returned in the first place is probably because they had announced that they were going to, as part of their public service broadcasting remit, start investing more in foreign language programming that they hoped might be more culturally significant for audiences. Public service broadcasting remit might explain why they made Humans, which on the surface looks like it could be a really mainstream TV sci-fi show, but actually is quite alternative because it features a really female-heavy cast, which is quite unusual to have female lead characters in sci-fi. There's a really diverse cast in terms of ethnicity. There's lots of family drama and emotions going on, which is very different from most sci-fi programmes. So perhaps the ownership and the kind of funding as to where that money comes from for Channel 4 actually affects the programmes that they either make, i.e. Humans, or that they buy in from other companies and other countries like The Returned. It's important to understand a bit about regulation for the industry questions that you might get on Humans and the Returned. Now, TV in Britain is regulated by Ofcom, who also regulate radio. And Ofcom are the company that are responsible for ensuring that programmes and channels follow various rules about things like harmful or offensive material, swearing, the use of children in programming. They're also the ones that audiences can complain to if they feel like a programme has breached any of those guidelines. And Ofcom will be the people that deal with the complaints and then issue appropriate punishments if necessary. Now, there are a variety of issues to do with regulation that might be relevant to both Humans and the Returned. Have a think about anything in either of those programmes and the set episodes that might be seen as controversial or offensive or harmful. So, for example, there is some swearing within the two programmes, although not a huge amount, so I don't think that's going to be a big issue. Within Humans, there is a narrative later on in series 1 where the father, Joe, programs the synth Anita so that she can have sex with him. And this is quite controversial. Anything involving sex or nudity is something that Ofcom would regulate in terms of how much they can show and can't show, and at what time the programme has to be broadcast as a result. So programme makers have to be quite careful about what they do and don't show. They will often cut away to other scenes, or they won't show the graphic nature of a particular scene, because what they don't want to happen is for Ofcom to get involved in a serious complaint about them. They want to make their show as exciting as possible, but what they don't want is for their show to be forced to be shown at 11 o'clock at night when there'll be less people watching. So TV programme makers and Ofcom have to tread quite a fine line between giving the audience what they want but also following the rules. And it's similar in The Returned as well. In The Returned, later on in the series, not so much in episode 1, but later on in the series, we do see some scenes of violence. And we also see, people being killed. And so that's something that they have to be aware of. There is also a scene in episode 1, which is your set episode of season 1, where Lena and Frederick are having a sexual experience whilst Camille is on the school bus. And bearing in mind, I think at the time, Lena and Camille are supposed to be around 15 years old, showing a scene like that between essentially two children, who would be considered underage technically in the UK, could be seen as quite controversial. And it's perhaps one of the reasons why The Returned was shown later at night on Channel 4. And you have to consider the effects that those regulations and the regulatory issues will have when they distribute those programmes to others. So, for example, in France, there isn't technically a legal age of consent. It's a bit vaguer in France, the law, but 15 is the kind of supposed or suggested age of consent in France. So actually the scene would have shown legal consensual sex in France, but when you bring it to the UK, the rules are slightly different. And so you might find that when you start distributing a programme globally to other countries, regulation gets very tricky because Ofcom only govern Britain, and trying to make sure that your programme satisfies the rules and regulations of all the countries you want to distribute to can get very, very difficult. Regulation has also been made much harder by technology, and this ties in with Livingstone and Lunt's theory. There is a video about that on my YouTube channel as well. Technology, things like piracy, things like websites and streaming sites have made it very difficult to regulate programmes. Previously, in previous years, we used to just have the watershed, which was kind of at 9 o'clock at night. If you had something controversial that you didn't think children should watch, you would put it on after the watershed to try and ensure that as fewer children as possible were watching. The difficulty now is, of course, that people can actually choose to stream that programme any time of day, wherever they want, whenever they want. And those websites don't check really anything to do with your age. Most of these websites just ask you, are you over 18? And you tick and say yes.